guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Sabrina. Today's video I am making another rag quilt, but this one is being made with half square triangles. And it is flannel. Now a couple things I did different with this is, as far as the batting, I used flannel on the top, flannel on the back, and I used flannel for the batting on the center layer. Now another thing I did different was I cut the batting, the middle layer, the same size as the backing and the top, so that the batting would show in the seam allowance and would make the ragging thicker, the seam allowance thicker. So I've never done that before. I wanted to give it a try and see how it would turn out, if it would make this look thicker, if it would look nice or not, really. It does look pretty thick, so I think I'm satisfied with it. I like it. And another thing I did different is cutting the half square triangles. You'll see how I do that in the video. For me, it just seems a little bit faster as far as sewing and pressing. So take a look at it. I don't know if anybody's ever done them like that or not. If you're making half square triangles that are all the same colors, it just seemed to make sense to me to cut them and make them the way I did in the video, and you'll see that. But yeah, I like it. It's not specifically a specific pattern I followed. I kind of just had it all up here. And for the back, I used this red snowflake. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. I'm going to see if I can find the yardage on this and how much I bought, so that you guys, if you want to make this, you can. But it's 64 squares, 8 inches is how they were cut, and then the finished block is 7 inches, 7 by 7. But let me see how much fabric I bought for this. And then I did purchase the fabric from JOANN'S, and I didn't really follow a pattern. I kind of just had it all in my head here how I wanted to do this. But I did use 3 yards of the red snowflake on the back. I did 3 yards of the white for the batting, and 2.5 yards for the gray snowflake on the front, and 1.5 yards of the red and black. Now, word of caution, and I do warn you of this later in the video. This red, be careful, because it will bleed. So I did put some old towels in the washer. I washed it on cold, and the old towels, you can definitely see where they soaked up that red dye from this. And I think you can see on some of this gray, it might look like a little bit, a hint of a pinkish color maybe. But all in all, I don't think it's that bad, because up against the red, it looks great. But for washing instructions, all I did was put it in the washer, wash it on cold, and then took it out, dried it a little bit to see how it would look. I put it back in the washer, washed it again, and then put it in the dryer. So make sure you are checking your lint filter at least every 10 minutes or so. So mine did gather a good bit of lint as far as the dryer goes. So just word of caution, if you have not made these before and aren't aware of that, just keep an eye on your lint filters. And I also took it outside and shook it a couple times, just to kind of help get some of the excess stuff off. And I also put a border around this, which is also just a ragging. I just kind of clipped and ragged it with the edge that's there. So you'll see how I do that in the video. And then again, like, the border is on the back also, and then I have it on the front. And I did go through and kind of just trim off any loose threads or anything that was too long, and also do that with, like, where the seams match up right here. You might want to, like, maybe clip off some of the loose loose threads. Take it and shake it off. I might wash it a couple more times just to kind of help some of that ragging to be a little bit more looser. But all in all, I'm very happy with the way it turned out. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like, subscribe, and share if you haven't. So yeah, thanks for watching. Okay guys, to do this project, I am using this gray flannel with the snowflakes, this red, what they was referred to as tie-dye. I'm using black, and I'm using this for the backing, and I'm using the white flannel for the batting. So I do cut my half square triangles a little bit differently than most people would, being that these triangles are all the same colors. I'm going to cut my fabric in strips, and then I'll show you how I do these triangles. So I will need 64 squares total. 32 of those squares are going to be half square triangles with the black and gray and the red and gray. So I will need 32 red and gray, and I will need 32 black and gray. And I already have some of these done, as you can see, but I wanted to show you how I cut them and how I cut out the half square triangles. So I'm actually gonna square up the edge of my fabric, or make the edge of my fabric even. So I'm gonna line up the bottom of my fabric, and I'm cutting 2 at a time. This pattern's pretty forgiving if it's not completely perfect. So I'm gonna line up the bottom of this with the line on the mat. And then I'm gonna line up one of the lines on my ruler at the bottom, and then I'm going to line up the edge of the ruler with a mark on my mat, and it's going to be the same mark down at the bottom as at the top. And I'm just going to trim this little edge off here just to make everything look even, so that I can start cutting my strips. Now I'm going to flip this over because I cut from this side. I'm going to show you a couple of these just so you get the gist of how I'm doing it. I'm going to do most of it off camera. And if you want to see more in depth on cutting fabric, you can watch my other video I posted a while back. Has more in-depth details on cutting. So I'm going to cut these strips at 6 1/4. So this ruler is 6 inches. This ruler I'm using the 1/4 inch mark. So I have the 1/4 inch mark here, 6 inches here. I'm going to cut my strip. Okay. And I usually like to make sure it cut before I pull the ruler down or pull the ruler away. There we go. Alright, so I have these 2 strips, and I'm gonna cut another one. I do have some more black fabric here, so alright, so I have another strip. I'm not going to get 6 1/4 out of this piece, so I'll set that aside. All right, so I have those, and I need some red. Put that on there. Which side? Let's see which side looks more even. I think it's this side. Line that up. There. I'm going to cut a couple strips of the red. So I have 6 1/4. And I'm going to cut one more, and I think that's all I need. I have a bunch of these already done. All right, let's do 6 1/4. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew these strips together, red with gray. I'm going to sew them right sides together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance down each side. And it's going to make like a tube. And then I'll show you from there how I cut the half square triangles. Okay, so I sewed a 1/4 inch on each side, and I made a tube. So now what I'm going to do is, now there might be debate on this method, whether or not it's wasting fabric, but to me, I feel like this is faster than cutting out individual squares and marking each square, sewing down the side of each mark, and then cutting them and then pressing them. Usually that's how most people do half square triangles, and that's probably if you are doing a lot of different color half square triangles, you might want to do it that way, but this is all the same color. So I chose to do it this way. Now at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that seam line I did here, and I'm going to line that up with the 8 inch mark on this ruler. So I have the 1 inch mark here, and I have the 8 inch mark here and 8 inch mark here. So make sure if you are using a ruler like this that you're not using a side that has this 1/2 inch mark. I'm using the side that just says 1 up here. Now I'm going to line this up with the point up here against this seam and the 8 inch mark down here. Now the 8 inch mark down here is the most important mark. So I am going to cut this on an angle. And if you want to leave yourself a little more, you can. And then you can always cut the square down, which I usually check them anyway. So I'm going to cut there and cut there. this piece is what's left over. Now this could be used as a extra bonus project, maybe make a pillow or something. I might do that because somebody did request if I could make a pillow sham. So I might use up these scraps and some of these strips that aren't wide enough to make another 6-inch strip. So I have this black left over. It's not wide enough for 6 inches. So what I will do is use these scraps, and I have some more scraps here from the other ones I cut already, and make a little bonus project. Alright, so now we have this cut, and if you open this up, there's the 8-inch square. Now I am going to, and then what I did was press toward the darker fabric. When I was pressing the ones I did, press towards the darker fabric. And then I use my ruler. I line up this diagonal line on that seam and make sure I have 8 inches. And if you need to trim it down or trim off the dog ears, you can. So I'm going to trim that off. Just trim that little piece off. And then I'm going to flip it around. Put that on there again. Line up the 8-inch mark down here because we squared that off. And make sure we have an 8 by 8 inch square. There. Alright, so now we have an 8 by 8 inch square. Alright. So now we're going to flip the ruler over. And we're going to do this again. So I'm going to line up that 8-inch mark right there on that seam, and the 8-inch mark there on that seam. Let me scoot in for you. Okay. Alright. Now it looks like I'm going to cut this off, which I am okay with, because to me it's faster cutting it this way. I don't mind doing that. And I just throw it in my garbage. I don't reuse this. So now I will cut this. Kind of cutting upside down. So now we have another 8-inch square, and I will press these toward the dark side, and I will again make sure it's squared up. So I'm lining the 8-inch mark up here. Line this line up here on your seam, and I'm going to cut off anything that is not square, which isn't much there. So I'm going to turn it this way, line up the 8-inch mark here. Looks like there's a little piece there I need to cut down. Make sure it's even. Now I'm going to cut this off. There we go. Alright. So I have another square. And now we're going to do this way again. So I'm going to line up the 8" on this seam, the 8" on this seam. If you want to go a little bigger, you can, just to make sure we get an even 8". So I went a little bigger on that one. I'm kind of lined up a little bit past the 8" mark. But I like the idea of squaring it up. So there we go. You can press the seam open also if you wanted to. That's totally your call. So this one I know I'm going to need to cut a little bit off because I cut it a little bit past the 8" mark. Now I'm going to do the other side. All right. That looks pretty good like that. So I'm going to leave that one alone. And I just keep cutting until I keep cutting strips, and I keep cutting my triangles until I have the amount I need. And again, like I said, it's 32 black and gray and 32 red and gray. Now when you cut, you don't want this tip to go past your seam. You want to make sure it's below that seam. Okay, this way, and I'm gonna go to the 8". And all right. We're looking good. This is how I cut all my squares. So if you wanted to try this method, I like it better this way. It's totally your call on how you want to do this. But I usually cut them all at once and then press them and just trim them down. But for sake of video, I'm working on it this way, just to show you. And turn it to this side. This up. All right. There we go. I think I need to put a new blade on my rotary cutter. All right, there we go. And it looks like we might get one more out of here. I don't know if we will or not. I'm gonna try. I think we can. That'll work. All right. And so this is the scrap left over on the end. There we go. We'll figure out something to do with the scrap. Alright, that's it guys, basically for this part. That's how I cut my half square triangles. And then the rest is pretty much how you would normally do a rag quilt. You usually end up cutting, even if you were to do this the other way, you still end up having to square up your squares anyway, because they're not always perfect. And I just like the idea of cutting a little bit bigger and then trimming it down. All right, so there you have it. There's our half square triangles. 8-inch. Now for the next part, I am cutting my batting at 8 inches because I again am going to do this a little bit different. I have never done it this way before. So I'm going to cut the batting, which I'm using flannel. I'm going to cut the batting also at 8 inches so that the batting shows through on the seams, because I want the batting in my seam allowance so that it gives it more ragging. I've never done it that way. I don't know if I've seen anybody do it that way. I'm sure there has been people, but I'm curious how the ragging will look. So I'm cutting my squares at 8 inches. This is 6 inches, this is 2 inches, so I have an 8-inch strip here. Okay, now I'm going to subcut this after I trim off these salvages. So I'm going to line up a line on one edge and a line on the other edge, and I'm going to cut these salvages off. There we go. And then I'm going to find my 8-inch mark. Right here. And I'm going to cut my squares. So I'm going to do this with all my flannel until I have the number of squares I need, which will be 64, because I'm doing this in every square. And then this piece you can open up and cut an 8-inch square out of that also. So I'm going to cut an 8-inch square. Alright, so I'm going to do that. Now for the backing, I'm also cutting at 8 inches. And I'm using this for the back. Now, if you wanted to do a shortcut on this, you could fold the fabric end to end, which is how I did it before. You can cut end to end, line it up, line up your edges with the mat, like this. Okay, so now we're going to trim both edges and square them up. You want to make sure you're cutting through both layers all the way up. And it is going to be a little bit harder to cut. You're cutting through 4 layers. And then at this point, you can flip it over. And I'm going to cut 2 strips at once. Who doesn't like getting things done a little bit faster? There we go. Now you can do this with the batting and the backing. There we go. Now we can take both these strips, turn them sideways. We're going to cut the selvage off. And I'm just making sure one line lines up with this edge and a line lines up with that edge. It doesn't matter which lines you're lining up. There we go. Alright, so now we'll cut the 8-inch block, which we'll be cutting 4 at a time. There we go. Another 8-inch. And I'm going to open these up. And I'm going to get the 8 inches off of these also. So alright. 8-inch block. There we go. Alright, so we have some backing, we have some batting, and we have some squares. So let's put those sandwiches together. Okay, so I have squares, half-inch or half-square triangles cut. I have my backing cut, and I have the batting cut. Now I have a lint roller here. If there's too much lint on this white, I'm going to try to clean it off as I go. But basically, I'm just going to layer my sandwich together. Everything should be 8 inches, 8 by 8. And I'm going to put this on top. And I'm going to do stitch in the ditch down along this seam. And I'm just going to sew right down inside there. Find my presser foot. Or my foot pedal, I should say, I guess. Alright. And I'm using white thread. I'm just using a all-purpose polyester thread. And I'm going to increase the stitch length because I am sewing through 3 layers. I'm going to, and it is like a top stitch, so I'm going to put it on 2.8. wanted to, you could just keep on chain piecing these. You don't have to stop and cut every time. I'll line these up. I'm not worried about the lint on the top of this piece at the moment. It is a lot of lint. I'll get all that later because it's probably just going to pick up more as I go. Alright. But I do want to wipe the lint off of this piece. Show you a close-up of that stitch in the ditch. Let me see if I can get you a close-up. So you can see, hopefully, I'm sewing just along the edge of that black is where the thread is. And also, by sewing just along the edge of this gray, the black seam, remember I pressed all toward this way so that when I'm sewing down this very edge, I'm sewing on the gray side, so I'm not sewing through all those layers of that seam allowance that's pressed over here. So you can use colorful thread on this if you wanted to. You could probably do a decorative stitch on this. I'll show you a red one. Let's do a red one. Piece of that. And make sure that when you are sewing this together that your backing is the nice side out, like this. And then you put your batting on top, and then this piece, the top on top. Let's do... if you can see the white, you can see the stitch down along there and how it went just down along the edge of the red. I'll do some more and then I'll probably do these off camera. It's a pretty simple process. Probably don't really need to watch me do the whole thing. basically, all I'm going to do is chain piece all of my pieces, all of my squares. I'm going to sandwich them all together. I'm going to do stitch in the ditch chain piecing. I'm going to do all that, and then after I have them all done, I'm going to go back and sew the other side. This is what the back looks like. And now I want to make sure that these are nice and flat, because right now we have 3 layers here, and we want to make sure all 3 of these layers are out nice and flat before we sew the other corner. Now if you wanted to, you could mark these. You just basically need a ruler and you need some chalk of some kind. Something that will come off, air erase marker or something like that. I wouldn't recommend using one of those friction pens. I have used friction pens before on, I did a t-shirt quilt, and I used a friction pen on the top of that t-shirt quilt, and you could see ghost lines where that friction pen was still there. Like you can kind of see it. Yeah, so don't use a friction pen on cottons like this, especially if it's like a top stitch, because I don't know, I'm just afraid it'll be seen, because it was like flannel shirts and things I was using, cotton t-shirt material, and I was able to see those lines. But you can use some chalk. If I can get this open, it's taped closed. Okay, so you can use these different color chalks. You can get them on Amazon, or any quilt shop would have them if you wanted to do that. I'll just pick this white out of here. And then basically all you would need to do is put a line from up here on the corner and just draw a line on there. And that's it. If you wanted to do it that way, you could. By any means, do whatever you're comfortable with. I'm not going to mark all mine. I'm just kind of going to wing it. You can pin all these layers together also if you wanted to. See, when I picked that up, this folded out. So you want to make sure these all stay flat. Take your time. Go at your own pace. If you wanted to use a walking foot, you can use a walking foot. I do have one on here. I'm just going to keep working on this, and when I get them done, we will go back. Alright, here is one of the red ones. And here's one of the black ones. I'm just going to keep working on these. And then we'll lay them out and see how they look. Okay, they are done. Here's my pile of red and gray. And I got my pile of black and gray. We're going to go lay these out on the floor. Okay, so here it is. I feel like I need to add another row to finish off the point on the red, but I don't think I'm going to do that though. I'm out of fabric at this point, so I'm going to finish it as it is. So all we need to do now, which most of you will know, is put our rows together, and then once you get the top row done, sew it to the second row and the third row and so on. So I'll show you a couple rows to get started, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so it is very important that whenever you pile these rows up, make sure you keep them in order so that you're not sewing the wrong square to the wrong piece or wrong square, because then your pattern isn't going to match what you have laid out. So let's make sure we're doing that. And then I did increase my stitch length to 3.0. We are sewing through 6 layers of flannel, and I would highly recommend you use a walking foot on this part. So basically we're going to put the first square up against the back side of the second square. You're going to sew back sides together. I'm using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now we're going to open this up, and this piece will go here. Have to double check myself, like that. Let's see what the next one. Okay. Alright, so we're going to put back sides together. 1/2 inch seam allowance. Just make sure that you're nesting those seams one on this side, one on that side as you're sewing these down. Okay, you can pin these if you want so that you're not having to mess with it as you sew, but I'm just gonna go for it. Okay, got some more thread. I'm just gonna pick up where I left off. Again, just take your time over those humps. I'm gonna reposition myself, make sure everything looks good. Okay, we have 2 rows. This is the top. Alright, we got 2 rows done. So I'm going to keep moving on with the rest of the quilt, and I'll let you see it when it's finished and put together, and then I'll show you how to rag it. Now as I sew the rest of these together, I'm going to sew 2 rows together, and then sew 2 more rows together, and then 2 more rows together, and then I'll assemble the 2 rows to the 2 rows to make 4 rows, just so I'm not dealing with so much bulk at one time. So it will make it a little bit easier when I'm putting all these rows together. Just a suggestion, but it's a lot of bulk. So I'm interested, I can't wait to see how it turns out with having the white in the center and using the white as part of the ragging also. So that'll be interesting. It should be very, very thick ragged seams, nice and full is what I'm hoping for. So we'll see how this goes. Okay, I have it all assembled and done. I have not ragged it yet, but this is what it looks like so far. And I'm going to cut some fabric. I have some black left. I'm going to cut some 1.5 inch strips, sew around the edge of the front and the back, and then that'll be sort of like a border to go around the edge, and then that'll get ragged also with the edge. But I'll show you how I'm doing that. That'll be my next step, and then I'm going to start clipping. Okay, so I am going to sew, I cut these out 1.25 inches wide. I'm going to be using these to sew around the border of the quilt. So right now I just need to take these and sew them together so that I have long enough pieces. And I'm just going to sew a straight stitch. And then if you want... Okay, so basically I'm going to make sure that the seam is laying on top of the quilt. Okay, Then I'm going to take one for the back and I'm putting one on the back. And again, but for the back, I want the seam facing on the outside. Because once we sew this down at 1/2 inch, it's going to fold over like that. And that's going to be the edge. And then this will all get ragged when we rag the edge of this. So again, we want to make sure on the top that this seam is facing out on top of the quilt. And then for the back, we want to make sure that this seam is facing on the outside. Because on the back, we're going to do the same thing. It's going to get folded out or folded to the edge, and you're not going to see that seam. So I'm going to put this up here. Now if you want to pin this, you can. And when you get to these seams, if you wanted to press them open, you very well could. If you don't want to sew through all that bulk, you could press this open. So I'm going to get started. There's a lot of heaviness here, so we're going to have to keep messing with it, adjusting it how we need it. Alright, so 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then I just kind of adjust the top and bottom as I go. And then adjust your quilt however you need to. Probably would be nice if I had more space on my left. I guess I could put this on my big table, but I'm already started, so I'm just going to keep moving. Okay, I'm going to adjust the next section. And I'm just going to keep rolling with this, and then I'll show you how I start the next side. Okay, so I got to the end. I have a little left over, which is fine. I'm just going to trim that off. I did backstitch right there. So now I'm going to cut my thread. And I'm going to trim this off right there. And then I'm going to open this up. Well, actually, I guess I should say I'm going to press this way. And then I'm going to start around that corner. Then again, I am going to put one piece on top, making sure this seam is on top. And I'm going to put one on the bottom. Again, making sure, I probably should have used black thread, but that's okay. Once it's all done and washed, and once all that white flannel starts showing through, it's not going to be noticeable. But at least you can see what I'm doing here. Alright, so I have these like this, and I have this on top, I'm going to put this one on the bottom. So this one will be on the bottom. I'm just going to line it up with the edge like I did the other side, and I'm just going to start sewing. Just as you need to. It's a lot of bulk here. Hopefully you can see that. Alright. I press that open where that bulky seam is. And keep going. Okay, so I have all four corners or all four sides on. Now, one more stitch I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this over front and back. So there's the back. You can even press this if you would like to keep it folded. And I'm going to sew an 1/8 inch top stitch right along that seam just to hold these down. And I am going to change my thread to black so that it blends in on top. So this seam's not even going to be seen. Okay, so I switched my thread to black, and I'm going to make sure this seam, front and back, is pressed over. And I'm going to start up here at the top, and I'm going to sew an 1/8 inch seam allowance along the edge here. You want to make sure both these pieces, top and bottom, are pulled over. So when you get to the corner, you can pivot and do the same thing down this side. And do this all the way around. I'll let you know when it's all done. Okay, there's the top stitch. Front and back. All the way around. So now I'm going to go put this on the floor and we're going to see what it looks like. So you can see also how this edge is sandwiched in between this black. So whenever we start ragging or clipping, that's all going to be on the inside. Alright, there it is. I think the border just really sets it off and finishes it. But now comes the fun part, and I know that's everybody's favorite part, clipping all these seams. So I'm gonna work on that and find a movie to watch or something. But I think the snowflakes are perfect for the winter. Let's see what the back looks like. Okay, there's the back. I was a little worried about using plaid, like a plaid pattern on the back, because I've used plaid on the back before, and because it didn't kind of line up or wasn't cut exactly perfect, it kind of didn't look right to me. But being that there are snowflakes all over this, you kind of really don't notice. Okay guys, I did most of the clipping on this. I have one row left to do, and I need to also do the border. I just wanted to show you how I do this. Nothing too fancy about this process, but you'll need a pair of ragging shears. I use these. They work okay. I've never really used another pair before. These do kind of hurt my hand after a while. I know Fiskars makes a pair, but they're spring-loaded, so you want something that has the spring-loaded mechanism to make it easier on your hand when you're clipping all these seams. So as you can see, I clipped these seams about a ½ inch apart, and you want to make sure you're not clipping into your thread line or seam line right here as you're clipping. And then I'll show you. Now I am clipping through like 6 layers of flannel. So yeah, I do about a ½ inch apart. I'll be interested to see how the ragging looks, being that I am using my the batting, the flannel batting. I included it in the seam allowance. So I'd be interested to see how this all turns out after I wash it. But anyway, I just sit and clip. Find yourself a movie or something. And as far as these sections go, I just clip. And then just want to make sure you don't clip into that seam. Clip right up to maybe 1/8 away. Now when I get to this seam here, this intersection, I just do the best I can. Clip it wherever you feel you need to, so that whenever it gets washed, it opens up. So we want all this to kind of fray and open up a little bit. So just do the best you can. The more you wash it, the more it'll fray. These are perfect to do in the cold months because you can lay this on your lap and it helps keep you warm. That's all there is to it. Make sure you don't clip your fingers. Okay, so all the seams are clipped. All around the edge is clipped. So did about a 1/2 inch clip when clipping all the seams, and at the intersection where the seams meet, I did my best just to kind of clip it so that separates and hopefully rags as it gets washed. So right now I'm going to wash it. Okay guys, there is the finished product. I have to say I'm pretty happy with it. My hubby's helping me hold this up so I can show you guys. But anyway, with the batting being used in the seam allowance, it does make a pretty thick ragging effect. I probably could have clipped these a little bit closer, but I think the more I wash it, the more that will fray some. But also a little caution if you use the red flannel from JOANN'S. Make sure you use some retain or some old towels in the wash because the red will fade. It faded just a tad, you can see. I think it's got a little bit of a pink tint on that gray, but I don't think it's that noticeable that it's making me unsatisfied with the product. But the half square triangle look looks so cool. I like it a lot. But let's take a look at the back. Okay, so there is the back. I like the black border around there. I think it just really kind of finishes it off. But if you look close, you can see the X design in the quilt. But all in all, I like it. Okay, so also I just went through and I tried to trim some of this stuff off the edges just to clean it up a little bit. And I went inside some of these intersections to try to trim some of this fringe off. But I'm really happy with it. If you guys happen to try this pattern, let me know.